Okay, Objective 8.4. So here we're taking a look at symbols for points, lines, and area. So I'm going to start with just chatting about points. All of these three different kinds um, of features are all going to be showing up on your maps. So, and you will see them on maps all the time. So I'm going to start with points. The reason is because it's conceptually the simplest, but it is also the most complex because it can represent so much. So as we know, a point represents an infinitely small location. So it means that something happens there at that spot. So we put a point symbol there to represent it. These are often really exaggerated, by the way, so just so you're aware of that. The cool thing about points is that I can show qualitative information as well as quantitative information. So qualitative is like no numbers, non-numerical, where quantitative is with numbers. And so I can show values with a single point symbol. So points have three main functions. So they can show point features, they can represent features that are referenced to points, and represent 2D features that is conceived as a point. So the last two are kind of the same in some way. One's like 2D versus the other one, which is like a bunch of points. But when I show point features, I'm showing a single thing. That's all I'm going to show. The other two, I am taking area, like an area of information, and I'm shrinking it up into a single point. So that single point can now be shown as something. So a really good example of that would be like polling results. And so if you're polling and it like you poll about, I don't know, whether or not a certain policy of government is what you consider to be adequate. So they poll and say, hey, you know, they're going to be doing this. Which way do you want to vote? And so now you can take that and you can look at areas of like subdivisions and you can bring it down to that single point. Another really good example is just looking at demographics. So how many people live in Calgary? I'm going to take that and I'm only going to give one number. So why do I need to show all of Calgary as one number? So I can just bring it down to a single point and then I can represent that number in some way. So there are two kind of ways, again, like to say that two types of ways of showing symbols or what symbols oh my goodness, symbols show. One is qualitative and the other one is quantitative. So the quantitative way of changing a point symbol is size. So let's show the bigger you make it, the more there is in that area. And that's it's really easy to see, and especially if you're looking at relationships between things, it's really easy to follow. If you change the color, that kind of puts it into a category. So if we start with shape, for example, I'm going to change the shape. That tells me I'm looking at something different. So if I go from like a star to a triangle, those are two different things. And so I can pull relationships between them based on their spatial location, but I can't say that one's related to the other. Like they could be apples and oranges, right? Completely different. But I can change color within a single type. So if I have stars, and I'm showing stars all over my map, I can change the color, and that will allow me to understand more information, more attributes is the word we use, about that point. Because there's spatial location, and then there's non-spatial attributes. So that's like, I am located here, and I have brown hair, and I have blue eyes. So I'm located here, but my brown hair and blue eyes have nothing to do with where I'm located. So I would show, okay, you know, in this area, there's this many blue-eyed people, this many brown-eyed people, and this many green, hazel, whatever other colors there are, gray, black, I don't know, all of those. So you can show all of those as you, just by changing the shape. So if I have an eye, for example, as my symbol, I can show an eye and I can change the color of the eye. Very easy to understand, right? So there are different types of point symbols that we can use. The first one is a geometric symbol. So the first one I want to point out is these top two symbols that I've put here. So I have a dot and I have a star. So with my star, for example, that is, usually it's a really important spot, because we just kind of relate stars with importance. Or if I use a dot, then I know that there's something like right there. The dot, of course, can like be varied in every way that you can imagine. So using that, looking at this, do I know what they're going to represent? And the answer is no. I have to have a very descriptive legend in order to use these symbols. So these geometric symbols, star, point, triangle, they hold no meaning to us, other than maybe the ordinal thing of a star versus a circle. That those mean something. That just one's more important than the other, but that's all we really know. We don't know what is more important than the other unless we look at the legend. So be very, very descriptive if you are going to be using those kinds of symbols. The next kind of symbol is these pictures. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them because each of them kind of have their own thing that you can pull out of them. So here's a pin. So the reason I like using a pin is because these pins are very much related to younger generations. So we know that if I open up a map and I like online and I see a pin in there, I know that that pin relates to something that has been placed there, and maybe that's the location I want to get to. So it's just really identifying a location. If we go before this, before we had online maps, and I did actually grow up in the world of no online maps, so I'm dating myself here. So if I saw a pin, it would be related to like office, an office space, maybe the number of tacks. So if I didn't know that pins represent that, and I go and look at a historical map, I would assume something to do with an office, where now it's just a location. So you have to keep in mind your audience when you're dealing with these, because one symbol can really be confusing if it is meant to evoke an emotion, right? So that's really important. And that's why I showed that one. I can change the size of it and everything else, and it's going to show me more important, less important, or if there's more of something in this location, less of something in that location. I can change the size, I can change the color. The thing is, I would never change the shape because the shape is actually identifying that certain information for me. The next one is the beer mug. So the beer mug represents beer, booze, alcohol of some sort, adult drinks of some sort. So looking at the mug, what it evokes for me is a place that I can go and drink beer. So it's like a bar, or lounge, or maybe breweries there. That's what the beer mug means to me. It is a very limited in scope, right? Because I'm certainly not going to look at that and wonder, I wonder if that's showing me a location of a playground. So that to me is, it has a very limited scope, and it is a really good graphic to represent that. Now what I can do is change the color of the beer, or I can change the amount of foam on top, or I can change the size of it. I can do all kinds of stuff with that, but I'm still representing something related to beer or alcohol. So it's a really good feature for that. This one with the cow, moving on to that one, this one has something to do with cattle. And okay, I know that anybody who's in the agricultural industry is going to get after me because it's probably not a cow because it's got the ring in the nose and doesn't have an udder. So it's probably a bull. I know, I'm just going to refer to it as a cow just because it's easier. So, because usually we don't measure things by cows or by bulls, it's usually number of cows. We always refer to it as a cow. Drive past a field, it's a cow. So anyway, for the rest of you who don't really care, that's just added entertainment for you. So, so here's this cow. I know it has to do something to do with cows. Now, normally we don't map a cow. We might map the path it goes around that day or something if we put a GPS on it. Could be interesting. But otherwise, really the cow often means cattle. So that means that there's more than one. And so there's neat things I can do with this. So I can change the size of it. because I can, you know, I can change how big it is and small it is depending on the number of cattle or something like that. This cow has spots. So I could change the number of spots, increase the number of spots, decrease the number of spots. Maybe if it has spots like this, it is considered dairy cattle. If it is no spots at all, it is going to be a meat, like butchering, so meat cattle. So if that's the case with between the two, I can easily see that. It makes a very easy, obvious representation. So point symbols are really they can describe a lot. They really can. And then on top of that, those after we talk about these graphics here, so those are the three. You can also do pie charts and graphs. And so if you have those on your map, you can represent those as a point. They're a point symbol. And you can show all kinds of stuff, all kinds of statistics with graphs. I don't have an example here, but that is another type of point symbol that you can use. And it provides additional information. You can still change the color, you can still change the shape of it, you can still change the size of it. And it all shows different information. So point symbols are really complex. They're simple, but they're complex. The next type of symbol is lines. So lines are used to symbolize a linear feature. And I am going to say that they're used directionally or for boundaries usually. Those are when you're going to say, okay, yeah, I know that it's going to show me some sort of line that shows a direction or an edge of something. So there are generally 5 major functions, though, that fall under lines. The first one is showing length and direction. Length is easy to measure. Direction is easy to visualize when you use lines. Paths of movement. So we've seen every like GPS navigation system shows you changes the symbol of the road, so you know which one you're supposed to be on. Structure of linear networks. This is, for example, trying to get an ambulance to a hospital. It will show all the roads, and then it will also change the symbology based on congestion. So then they will take the least congested way to get to the hospital. Boundaries, we see that all the time. As long as it's not fully enclosed, then it can be considered a line, and it's like emphasized as a line. But a lot of times areas kind of take over those boundaries. So again, boundaries are more so for drafting. Like if you're going to be using drafting for mapping, then you'll see more boundaries and lines that are used, lines that are used for boundaries. And the last one is lines of equal value, so isolines. So this is like contours. You can see isolines for temperature, precipitation. So those types of isolines, they are not an area. They are enclosed, right? They never, like contours always close on themselves, but they're not representing a actual like an actual area. They're saying at this line is where I see this particular elevation or this particular value. So that's probably another reason why we would use lines. So to change up lines, they're not as complex because there's really not much more you can show with them other than direction and length. So you can change color, and the color will tell me what kind of feature class it is, the type of the line. So it can be dotted, or it can be with an arrow, or it can be double lined, or in these interesting ones down here. And that tells me qualitative information. The quantitative information is the thickness. So if it's really thick, it's kind of a ranking of importance, or the physical size of it, to try to generalize it a little bit. So you don't really like compress information into a line. You will compress it into a point, but not a line. Unless you're a river, like you'll take the edges of the river and compress it into like the center of the river. But you don't show much more than that, and the thickness will show you how thick it is, I guess. So these are 4 examples of the different kinds of lines you might come across. This one is showing direction. It's double line, showing direction on either side. This one is the a really interesting one. So this one could be showing highway. This one could be showing, hey kids, if you follow from here to here, you can go from this playground to this water park, right? So this might be something along those lines. It really stands out, and I can measure from here to here. So that also really helps. Then there's the plain old basic line, which everybody knows, and you can change that up as much as you need to. And then there's these, which might show you how much of something, like congestion, right? This would be fantastic for looking at traffic congestion. So wherever it's thicker is where the most congestion is, where it's thinner is where the least congestion is. So that's lines. Now we have area. Then that's the last one, or the polygon. So I totally enclose an object in a polygon. So for example, you're going to be enclosing a building as a polygon in your maps. So you can also show qualitative or quantitative information based on the area. There are two kind of main functions. You're representing two-dimensional features in their entirety, or you're trying to represent things that reference to areas. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you're looking at not so much temperatures because those are iso lines, but the textbook actually is a really good example looking at like invasive species. So if I'm looking at an invasive species, I can say, okay, this is the area that it started with, and over the years, the area that it is in has grown to these extents. So I can really watch that and see that with an area symbol. And that's what it means by referencing things that are referenced to areas. So the qualitative information that we get from area is showing what the kind of area it is, using color. We can also use patterns. So patterns are kind of cool because you can add like lines and hatching, and you can put in like little cows, just like what I was talking about before. But be very careful when you use pattern, because the more pattern you use, the harder it is to read. So keep that in mind as you're working through patterns. Also quantitative information we can show as well, so the darkness of the area. We often see that with color for elevation, right? So we can change the color to show the actual value of it, and we can relate back to it. So we can also identify importance based on how dark it is. Oftentimes the background is really light colored and the foreground is dark. So that also gives it like an identification of importance. And then I can also change the pattern. So if I am using a pattern, I can, let's say I'm looking at wind patterns in areas. So I'm like in Calgary versus like Rocky View versus Wheatland. I could use lines to represent the direction of the wind, and then that will allow me to really represent it well. Of course, being careful on how I do that, because otherwise it becomes really busy. But you can change the pattern. You can increase it, decrease it, and so forth. So lots of different things you can do with area. So that's it for point, line, and area. And here's some references again from all the PowerPoint looking at mapping in general. So take a look through those, and we will get started on the next objective when you're ready.